Something about Phil Mickelson's year never made sense. March, he quietly resigns from the Farms, a club he belonged to for decades. April, Augusta, no Phil, a vague health statement. May, the PGA Championship, still nothing. June, LIV rolls on without him. One of the most famous men in golf just vanished, and the sport collectively agreed not to ask why. Fans bought the family explanation because Phil has earned that grace before. But the details kept snagging. Why leave your home club in the middle of a round? Why did Augusta's chairman mention Tiger's struggles and step carefully around Phil's absence? The answers existed. They were sitting inside a club investigation and a reporter's notebook, waiting. On June 11th, the real reason leaked through Golf Digest, and within days, a 19-source investigation blew the doors off. What you believed about this spring was a cover story. Not a lie exactly, just half the picture. I want your gut reaction before you watch the rest, so drop it below. Hit subscribe if you want the follow-ups as this develops. Now let us walk through the timeline, the way it actually unfolded. To understand why Phil Mickelson disappeared, you have to go back to the single greatest day of his career, because the height of that day is what makes this year so hard to process. May 2021, Kiowa Island. Phil is 50 years old, ranked outside the top 100, written off by almost everyone with a press credential. Then he wins the PGA Championship and becomes the oldest major champion in the history of golf. Thousands of fans break through the ropes on the 18th hole and swallow him whole, and he walks through that crowd grinning like a man who just pulled off the heist of the century. 6 majors, 45 PGA Tour wins, a Hall of Fame locker, an endorsement portfolio built over 3 decades with names like Rolex, Callaway, and KPMG stitched onto his sleeves. At that moment, Phil Mickelson wasn't just beloved, he was untouchable. But there was always a second Phil, and one man had spent years documenting him. Alan Shipnuck is not a household name to casual fans, but inside golf media, he is the reporter who never let go of the Mickelson story. While the world saw the thumbs up and the gap-toothed smile, Shipnuck kept collecting receipts. In early 2022, he published an unauthorized biography, and in the process revealed comments Phil made about his new Saudi business partners, remarks so blunt about who he was willing to work with and why, that the fallout was immediate. Sponsors paused or walked. Phil issued an apology and stepped away from the game for months. That was his first exile, and it's important you remember it, because the pattern of this year is a rerun with higher stakes. Disappear, say little, wait for the storm to pass. It worked in 2022 because LIV Golf arrived with a reported 9-figure deal and gave him a stage, a paycheck, and a fresh start when the traditional golf establishment wanted distance. Underneath both versions of Phil runs the same engine, and if you want to understand him, this is the core of it. He is a gambler, not casually. Structurally, this is a man who once transferred $2.75 million to cover an offshore gambling debt through a stockbroker who was later convicted of money laundering, while Phil himself faced no charges. This is a man who had to hand back over $1 million in gains connected to an insider trading case involving his one-time friend and betting partner Billy Walters, again without being charged. And when Walters went to prison and wanted Phil to speak up for him, Phil declined, and the friendship died so completely that much of the golf world quietly sided with Walters. Every chapter of Phil's life follows the same instinct. See the risk, take the risk, charm your way out of the consequences. For 30 years, the table never beat him. His talent was so enormous, and his public persona so warm, that fans extended him a grace very few athletes ever receive. That grace is the reason the events of this spring stayed buried as long as they did. Now come forward to March 2026, to a quiet, exclusive club called The Farms in Rancho Santa Fe, the kind of place where Phil had been a member for decades and where his membership was part of his identity as San Diego royalty. According to reporting, that would only surface months later. A female employee of the club reported that Mickelson made non-consensual and inappropriate physical contact with her before a round. What allegedly happened next is the detail that should have told everyone how serious this was. Club officials went out onto the course, found one of the most famous golfers alive in the middle of his round, and instructed him to leave the property. Within days, he resigned the membership he had held for decades. Think about the weight of that. Golfers do not walk away from their home club over a misunderstanding. The club would later confirm it ran a thorough, independent investigation and took what it called decisive action. None of us knew any of this at the time. What we got instead was the vague language you heard about in the intro. Phil skipped the Masters, citing a family health situation, and given everything the Mickelson family has genuinely endured over the years, fans accepted it without a second thought. That week at Augusta, Chairman Fred Ridley spoke with warmth and hope about Tiger Woods, who was going through his own very public struggles. About the absence of a three-time Masters champion, Ridley offered nothing. Veteran golf writers noticed the omission and read it clearly. Augusta had likely heard what was circulating and wanted daylight between itself and Phil before anything went public. A month later, the PGA Championship arrived, the anniversary of his greatest triumph, and Phil skipped that too, with the same explanation. LIV events came and went without him. Inside the game's gossip channels, the story was spreading table to table, text to text. Outside, the public still believed a health story. And in the middle sat Shipnuck and a pair of Golf Digest reporters doing the slow, unglamorous work of confirming what the whispers claimed. The fuse was already lit. It was just burning quietly. On June 11th, it reached the powder. Golf Digest's Joel Beal and Todd Leonard published the first report of the incident at the farms, and the carefully maintained silence of 3 months collapsed in an afternoon. The story confirmed the employee's allegation, the club's independent investigation, and Mickelson's exit from the property and the membership. Phil's attorney, Tom Clare, initially described the whole thing as a misunderstanding that had been resolved. And then came a detail that badly undercut that framing. Clare had asserted there was video that supported Phil's side. A club spokesperson told Golf Digest that no video existed in the area where the alleged incident occurred. When your own lawyer's account is contradicted by the club within the same news cycle, the misunderstanding defense stops sounding like an explanation and starts sounding like a strategy. Then social media did what social media does, and one post became the turning point of the entire saga. The account No Laying Up, one of the most influential voices in golf, tweeted that golf's worst kept secret was out. Read that phrase again, because it is the most damning sentence of this whole story. It meant the insiders had known for months. Players knew, writers knew, club members knew. An entire industry had watched a legend vanish, understood roughly why, and said nothing to the millions of fans who buy the tickets and wear the hats. That single tweet reframed the story from a scandal about one man into an indictment of a culture, and the reaction it unleashed made the bigger report inevitable. Days later, Shipnuck published his full investigation through Scratch, and this was not a gossip item. It drew on interviews with 19 sources, and it was vetted by 2 media attorneys and a professional fact-checker before it ever went live. The report alleged a pattern of misconduct stretching back more than a decade. It included the account of Ashley Perez, the former wife of Tour pro Pat Perez, who alleged that during the 2015 Barclays, while staying at Phil's villa, he showed her an explicit photo of himself and propositioned her while her husband was steps away. She declined. According to the report, Phil later apologized twice, including on a recorded 26-minute phone call in 2022 that Shipnuck says he personally listened to. Ashley also described an earlier dinner with Phil's own longtime agent at the table, where she alleges Mickelson steered the conversation somewhere graphic and humiliating in front of a room full of people. And then there was the allegation that reads like a metaphor for the whole saga. Sources at another club claimed Phil once paid a pro shop employee $500 to drive his phone around the course for hours, manufacturing a false GPS trail to deceive his wife about where he was. A man allegedly constructing a decoy of himself, a fake signal moving down the fairways while the real Phil was somewhere else entirely. That is, this entire year in a single image. Now, fairness demands we sit with the other side, because there is one. Mickelson's spokesperson issued a statement saying that some of the allegations circulating are false and that others revisit mistakes he has already acknowledged publicly or privately. The statement argued that stacking disputed claims next to admitted ones does not make the disputed ones credible. That is a real argument, and you should weigh it. Notice, though, what the statement is and what it is not. It does not dispute each claim individually. It concedes that some of this is acknowledged truth, and as of today, Phil himself has not said one public word about the report. The man who once talked his way through an insider trading headline, a gambling expose, and a Saudi controversy, arguably the greatest talker the sport has ever produced, has gone completely silent. For a gambler, silence is what happens when you look down at your hand and realize there is no bluff left to run. So take stock of where the fall has landed. Augusta National, which once draped 3 green jackets on him, would not say his name in April. The PGA of America ran its championship without its most historic modern champion. Elive Golf, which paid a fortune to make him its cornerstone, carries on as though he was never on the roster. The sponsors who survived 2022 now face a decision with far heavier facts attached. In 2022, Phil's exile ended because someone still needed him. Lev needed a face, and money reopened the door. Look around in 2026 and ask yourself who needs him now. That is the difference between this disappearance and the last one, and it is why this one feels permanent in a way the first never did. And here is why this story is bigger than one golfer. For 30 years, golf ran a grace economy around Phil Mickelson. Talent bought forgiveness, charm bought silence, and winning bought time. Every institution in the sport participated, right up until the moment a club employee in Rancho Santa Fe filed a report and a handful of journalists refused to let it disappear. Whatever ultimately gets proven or disproven in these allegations, the 3 months of silence already told us something true. The people inside golf protected the legend long after they stopped believing in the man. The gambler finally met a table he could not talk his way off of. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments where you land. Grace, judgment, or waiting for more facts. Because I read every reply, and this conversation matters more than the algorithm does. Subscribe and ring the bell, because when Phil finally speaks, and someday he will, you'll want to be here for it.